In the winter of 1510, the Venetian Senate faced a problem no law could solve. The Republic's enemies had closed their trade routes, and the city's famed merchants were growing restless. But instead of sending more soldiers, the Senate turned to its glassmakers on the island of Murano. These artisans were asked to design objects so beautiful, so unmatched in the known world, that no prince or merchant could resist trading for them. The glassmakers responded with new colors, shapes, and techniques unseen before. Trade returned. Venice endured. This was not a miracle. It was the work of a society that treated creativity as a disciplined craft, not a personal indulgence. The Murano masters were not born geniuses, but men trained to experiment, fail, and perfect their work until it became an asset to the Republic itself. Today, many cultures treat creativity as a decorative flourish on a life otherwise defined by consumption. But creativity, when disciplined and cultivated, is a strategic resource. It builds cultural resilience. It attracts allies. It shapes the future as much as steel, laws, or armies. Our era faces a different blockade: the monotony of algorithmic content, the hollowing out of the arts, and the slow death of originality. The societies that survive will be those that treat creativity as a skill to master, not an accident of talent. Let's begin. If you value this channel's work, like this video and subscribe. The survival of serious culture depends on more voices refusing the collapse into banality. A civilization is measured by what it makes, not by what it consumes. When the act of creation fades, a society turns inward, feeding on its own past until even memory becomes ornamental. The discipline of creativity is not about novelty for its own sake. It is the skill of bringing new forms into the world that are worthy of enduring. Without it, a culture loses its ability to adapt without surrendering its soul. In the modern West, creativity is often treated as separate from civic life. Art is placed in museums, music in earbuds, literature in niche markets. But when a people cease to produce works that carry the weight of their values, they leave no imprint on the future. The talent to create is not enough. It must be honed until it becomes a civic weapon. The Murano glassmakers did not work for applause. They worked for the survival of Venice. A society where creativity is treated as an amateur pastime will be outmatched by one that forges it into a craft. This is as true in architecture as in software, in music as in military doctrine. The forms a culture produces shape its alliances, its morale, and its destiny. That is why mastering creativity is not a luxury. It is a civic duty disguised as an art. A culture that endures does not wait for inspiration. It builds systems that compel creation. Cathedrals rose in medieval Europe not because masons were moved to build, but because the society had an unbroken chain of training, patronage, and expectation. Creativity flourishes when it is embedded in the structure of life, tied to goals beyond the moment. Today's world has inverted this. Algorithms feed people pre-packaged forms, erasing the need for skill. In such an environment, the discipline to create must be cultivated deliberately, the way a military cultivates strategy. Without that discipline, what passes for culture becomes a sequence of consumable distractions. When a society produces work that is both new and worthy, it alters its trajectory. The printing press reshaped Europe not through its invention alone, but because printers, engravers, and writers mastered a new skill set to wield it. They learned to use their craft with precision, and in doing so, they reshaped the balance of power. This is the hidden strength of a civilization that prizes mastery of creation. It generates works that cannot be replicated easily or cheaply by rivals. The Venetians had their glass, the Japanese their lacquerware, the French their Gothic stonework. Each required a lineage of skill, guarded and taught across generations. In every case, creativity was not an ornament, it was a cornerstone of sovereignty. When a culture neglects the mastery of creativity, decay follows in patterns as predictable as the fall of empires. The first sign is imitation without understanding. A society begins to copy the forms of its golden age without the knowledge of how they were made. What once was the cutting edge becomes a lifeless symbol. reproduced for comfort rather than advancement. From there, skill atrophies. Crafts that once required decades to master are replaced with shortcuts that mimic the surface but lack the depth. Architecture loses its proportions, literature its weight, music its structure. Each field becomes a ghost of itself, unable to inspire allegiance or awe. This is not a sudden collapse, but a quiet hollowing. By the time it is recognized, the means to reverse it are often gone. Rivals can sense when a culture has abandoned its own making. They introduce their works into the vacuum, offering designs, technologies, and narratives that carry their values instead. Influence seeps in without resistance. It is not conquest in the battlefield sense, but it produces the same result. The people live inside a world built by others. Civilizations do not fall from exhaustion alone. They fall because they lose the ability to bring forth new works worthy of their name. When creation becomes rote, when mastery is treated as optional, the foundation cracks. At that point, recovery demands more than sentiment, it demands a return to the discipline of making. Societies that preserve creativity as a living skill design their institutions to demand it. Guilds once bound craftsmen to high standards, not through nostalgia, but through contracts, apprenticeships, and the oversight of peers. These structures created an environment where mediocrity could not pass unnoticed, and where skill was measured against the best of the age, not the minimum required to sell. In the modern era, this principle still applies, though the settings have changed. Universities, workshops, and research centers can serve the same function as the guild halls of Florence or the ateliers of Paris if they refuse to lower their standards. Without such structures, creativity becomes untethered from discipline and drifts toward spectacle. The key is continuity. A master must be able to pass on more than technique. He must transmit the reasoning that guides it. In this way, a culture ensures that each generation begins where the last left off, rather than starting over in ignorance. This continuity is what allows a tradition to evolve without breaking. The societies that will endure this century will be those that treat creative mastery as a requirement for citizenship in the fullest sense, not in a legal sense, but in the expectation that one contributes to the shared inheritance. Where the skill to create is cultivated and protected, a culture can absorb shocks, resist imitation, and renew itself from within. Where it is neglected, decline becomes the default setting. Cultural power is not maintained by numbers alone. It is sustained by the ability to create works that others must acknowledge, whether they admire them or resent them. A nation with this capacity can project influence without firing a shot. Its architecture becomes a statement, its engineering a benchmark, its art a language understood beyond borders. When a society produces at this level, it forces others into a position of response. They must either attempt to imitate the work or develop something of their own to compete. In either case, the originator sets the terms. This is why mastery of creativity is not an internal matter. It is a form of strategic leverage. The absence of such mastery invites cultural dependence. Importing the symbols, technologies, and designs of others means importing the worldview embedded within them. Over time, the adopting culture forgets how to produce its own high forms. It becomes fluent in another's language of creation, but illiterate in its own. This is a slow erosion of sovereignty, carried out not by armies, but by aesthetics and standards. History's most enduring powers all understood this. Rome imposed its architecture as much as its law. Ming China guarded its porcelain techniques with the same care as its borders. The United States once exported its cultural forms with the same confidence it exported steel. In every case, creative mastery functioned as a form of soft dominion, an assertion that the culture could define the terms of beauty, function, and meaning. The long-term stakes of mastering creativity are civilizational in scale. A culture that continually produces new high forms renews its own legitimacy. It gives its people visible proof that they belong to something capable of shaping the future, not merely surviving within it. This is the foundation of morale, of identity, and of unity. Abandon that mastery, and time turns against you. A society that cannot create must borrow. A society that must borrow begins to imitate, and imitation, over generations, becomes dependence. At that point, decline is no longer a risk, it is a path already taken. The work of mastering creativity cannot be outsourced to a few exceptional individuals. It must be distributed, structured, and expected. The workshop, the laboratory, the studio, the design bureau, these are not side projects of a culture. They are the engines that prevent its collapse. What is made shapes what is possible. The tools you use, the forms you see, the symbols you live among, each one either comes from your own lineage or from someone else's. Mastery of creativity decides which. In the centuries to come, the societies that thrive will not be the ones that consume the most, but the ones that make the most that matters. The Murano glassmakers are long gone, yet Venice still bears the mark of their work. Their craft outlived the wars, the blockades, and the fortunes of the Republic. It endured because the city treated their skill as essential to its survival, not an ornament to be admired from a distance. Our age is no different in its needs, only in its delusions. We surround ourselves with the products of other cultures while calling ourselves free. But the measure of freedom is the ability to make for oneself objects, ideas, structures, and symbols that can stand against the world's tests. Mastering creativity is how a civilization speaks in its own voice. Without it, that voice falls silent, and the story is told by others. The path forward is not to preserve creativity in amber, but to keep it alive in the hands of those trained to wield it with purpose. This requires discipline, inheritance, and the refusal to accept work that does not meet the highest standards. If this vision resonates with you, help carry it forward. Subscribe, share this message, and join in resisting the quiet decay that comes when a people forget how to create. The future will belong to those who can still bring something new into the world and make it last.